The wind howled like a banshee across Arlington National Cemetery that October evening, bending the ancient oak trees until their branches scraped the ground. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez had been walking his post for exactly 47 minutes when the first lightning bolt split the sky, illuminating the white marble of the tomb of the unknown soldier in stark, ghostly relief. 21 steps south, turn. 21 seconds of silence. 21 steps north, turn. 21 seconds of silence. The ritual had become as natural as breathing during his 18 months as a tomb guard, but tonight felt different. The storm that meteorologists had predicted as severe was proving to be something far more dangerous. Rain began as scattered drops, then transformed into sheets of water that seemed to fall sideways, driven by winds that the Weather Service would later clock at 87 miles per hour. Marcus adjusted his grip on his M14 rifle, feeling the familiar weight of the weapon that had been his constant companion through countless ceremonies. His dress blue uniform was already soaked through, the wool fabric clinging to his lean frame, but his posture remained ramrod straight. The white gloves on his hands had turned translucent with moisture, yet his movements remained precise, mechanical, perfect. A massive gust of wind struck him like a physical blow, threatening to knock him off balance. For a split second, his left foot slipped on the wet marble, but years of training kicked in. He recovered seamlessly, continuing his measured pace as if nothing had happened. The tourists who usually gathered behind the chains had long since fled to their cars or the nearby visitor center, leaving Marcus alone with the storm and the sacred duty that bound him to this place. Thunder crashed overhead, so close that Marcus felt it in his chest, but he didn't flinch. His dark eyes remained fixed straight ahead, focused on a point beyond the storm, beyond the present moment. In his peripheral vision, he could see debris flying across the plaza. Leaves, small branches, even a plastic water bottle that tumbled end over end before disappearing into the darkness. The rain was coming down so hard now that it bounced off the marble like bullets, creating a mist that rose knee-high around the tomb. Marcus's black dress shoes, polished to a mirror shine that morning, were now invisible beneath the standing water that had begun to pool on the usually immaculate plaza. Still, he walked. 21 steps south, turn. 21 seconds of silence. During those 21 seconds, as he stood at attention facing the tomb, Marcus thought about the 3 unknown soldiers lying beneath the white marble. World War I, World War II, Korea. Men who had given everything for their country, whose names were known only to God. They had faced storms far worse than this, storms of bullets and bombs, of fear and uncertainty. What was a little wind and rain compared to that? Another lightning strike, closer this time, illuminated the inscription on the tomb. Here rests in honored glory, an American soldier known but to God. The words seemed to glow in the electric light, and Marcus felt the familiar surge of pride and responsibility that had driven him to volunteer for this assignment. Not everyone could be a tomb guard. The selection process was brutal, the training even more so. Of the hundreds who applied each year, only a handful earned the right to walk this post. 21 steps north, turn, 21 seconds of silence. The storm was reaching its peak now, with winds that made standing upright a constant battle. Marcus could hear the groaning of metal somewhere in the distance, probably the flagpoles near the amphitheater, bending under the assault. A tree branch, thick as a man's arm, crashed onto the plaza just 20 feet away, skittering across the wet marble before coming to rest against the retaining wall. Marcus didn't even glance at it. His focus remained absolute, his dedication unwavering. This was more than duty. It was a sacred trust. The unknown soldiers beneath his feet had earned the right to an honor guard who would never abandon his post, never compromise his standards, never show weakness in the face of adversity. As he completed another circuit, Marcus noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. Through the driving rain, barely visible in the darkness beyond the plaza, he could see a small group of people huddled under the overhang of the memorial amphitheater. They weren't tourists. Tourists would have been long gone by now. These were different. Even through the storm, he could make out the distinctive silhouettes of military dress uniforms. The group under the amphitheater overhang consisted of 5 figures, their military bearing unmistakable, even in the howling wind. As Marcus continued his measured walk, he caught glimpses of them during his turns. A general's stars glinting on one uniform, the distinctive beret of a special forces officer on another. They had come here for a reason, and that reason was becoming clear as they watched his every step through the storm. 21 steps south, turn, 21 seconds of silence. The wind was now strong enough to lift Marcus's cap, but the chin strap held it secure. His rifle, weighing nearly 10 pounds, felt like it might be torn from his grasp by the next gust, but his grip remained firm. Water streamed down his face, making it difficult to see, but his muscle memory guided him along the familiar path. He had walked this route in blazing summer heat, in bitter winter cold, in gentle spring rain, but never in anything like this. A particularly violent gust caught him mid-step, and for a moment, Marcus felt his body lean into the wind at an angle that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. The storm was literally holding him up, and when it suddenly died for a few seconds, he had to quickly adjust to avoid stumbling. Through it all, his expression never changed, his pace never faltered. The watching officers exchanged glances. General Patricia Hawkins, a decorated veteran of 3 combat deployments, had seen soldiers face enemy fire with less composure than this young sergeant was showing against the elements. She had come to Arlington tonight for a private ceremony, honoring a fallen friend, but the storm had forced them to take shelter. What they were witnessing now was something none of them would ever forget. Colonel James Mitchell, the Special Forces officer, leaned close to the general's ear to be heard over the wind. "Ma'am, I've seen a lot of brave soldiers in my time, but this is something else entirely." General Hawkins nodded, her eyes never leaving Marcus as he executed another perfect turn, despite the chaos around him. She had heard about the dedication of the tomb guards, had even visited Arlington many times, but seeing this level of commitment in person was humbling. This wasn't just military discipline, this was devotion elevated to an art form. 21 steps north, turn. 21 seconds of silence. During those 21 seconds, as Marcus stood facing the tomb, a massive oak branch crashed down behind him, missing him by less than 10 feet. The sound was like a gunshot in the night, but Marcus didn't move a muscle. His breathing remained steady, his posture perfect. The unknown soldiers deserved nothing less than perfection, regardless of the circumstances. The storm seemed to be testing him now, as if nature itself wanted to see how far his dedication would stretch. The rain was falling so hard that it was difficult to breathe, each drop feeling like a small stone against his exposed skin. His uniform, designed for ceremony rather than weather protection, offered no defense against the elements. The wool was completely saturated, adding weight that made every movement more difficult. But Marcus had trained for this, even if he hadn't known it at the time. The tomb guard training was designed to break down every weakness, to forge soldiers who could maintain their standards under any condition. Hours of practice in the heat of summer, when the marble plaza became an oven that could cook an egg. Months of winter duty, when the wind chill dropped below zero and every breath felt like swallowing ice. This storm was just another test, and Marcus had never failed a test. As he began another circuit, Marcus noticed that the group of officers had moved closer, now standing at the edge of the plaza despite the danger. They were getting soaked, their own uniforms suffering in the storm, but they seemed compelled to witness what was happening. General Hawkins had pulled out her phone, not to take pictures, that would have been inappropriate, but to check the weather radar. What she saw made her gasp. The storm was intensifying, not weakening. The eye wall of what meteorologists were now calling a land hurricane was passing directly over Arlington. Wind speeds were approaching 100 miles per hour, with gusts even higher. Emergency services had issued shelter-in-place orders for the entire Washington, D.C. area. Yet here was this young sergeant, continuing his duty as if it were just another quiet evening at the tomb. 21 steps south, turn, 21 seconds of silence. A piece of metal roofing torn from some distant building sailed through the air like a deadly frisbee, passing close enough to Marcus that he could hear it whistle over the sound of the wind. Still, he didn't flinch. His training had taught him that the unknown soldiers had faced far worse than flying debris. They had walked through minefields, charged machine gun nests, held their positions while the world exploded around them. The least he could do was maintain his post through a storm. The storm reached a crescendo that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Wind speed spiked to 112 miles per hour, turning the rain into horizontal needles that stung like wasps. The ancient trees of Arlington, some over a century old, began to fall with sounds like thunder that rolled across the cemetery in waves. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, barely audible over the roar of the wind. Marcus felt the marble beneath his feet, vibrating from the force of the storm. Water was now ankle-deep across the plaza, turning his precise steps into a careful navigation through what had become a shallow lake. His rifle, slick with rain, required constant attention to maintain his grip. Every muscle in his body was engaged in the simple act of remaining upright and continuing his duty. 21 steps north, turn, 21 seconds of silence. During those 21 seconds, as Marcus stood at attention, a massive section of tree trunk, easily 3 feet in diameter, crashed onto the plaza where he had been walking just moments before. The impact sent a spray of water and debris in all directions, some of it striking Marcus's legs, but he remained motionless. His dark eyes, streaming with rain, stayed fixed on the tomb. General Hawkins felt her breath catch in her throat. She had commanded troops in combat zones, had seen courage under fire that earned soldiers the Medal of Honor, but what she was witnessing transcended ordinary bravery. This was something spiritual, a connection between duty and devotion that went beyond military training. Colonel Mitchell grabbed her arm. "General, we need to get him out of there. This is beyond dangerous now." But General Hawkins shook her head, water streaming from her cap. "Look at him, Colonel. Really look at him. He's not going to leave, and I don't think we have the right to make him." The truth was evident in Marcus's every movement. This wasn't stubbornness or misplaced pride. This was a young man who understood, perhaps better than anyone else present, what it meant to stand guard over America's unknown heroes. The storm would pass, but his duty was eternal. 21 steps south, turn, 21 seconds of silence. A lightning strike hit so close that the thunder was instantaneous, a crack that seemed to split the world in half. The electrical discharge lit up the entire cemetery in stark black and white, revealing the devastation the storm was wreaking. Trees down everywhere, debris scattered like confetti, standing water reflecting the chaotic sky. And in the center of it all, one lone figure maintaining perfect military bearing. Marcus felt the electricity in the air, felt his hair trying to stand on end beneath his cap. Every instinct screamed at him to seek shelter, to abandon this exposed position and wait out the storm in safety. But those instincts had been overridden by something stronger, the oath he had taken, the trust placed in him, the sacred nature of his duty. The unknown soldiers had faced their own storms. The soldier from World War I had endured the hell of trench warfare, where death came from poison gas and artillery barrages that lasted for days. The World War II soldier had fought through the beaches of Normandy or the jungles of the Pacific, where every step might be his last. The Korean War soldier had faced human wave attacks in sub-zero temperatures, where frostbite was as dangerous as enemy bullets. What was wind and rain compared to that? What was personal discomfort when weighed against their ultimate sacrifice? 21 steps north, turn, 21 seconds of silence. As Marcus completed another circuit, he noticed that more people had joined the group of officers. Despite the emergency warnings, despite the obvious danger, word was somehow spreading. A small crowd was gathering under whatever shelter they could find, all of them watching this extraordinary display of dedication. Among them, Marcus could make out the distinctive uniform of an Arlington cemetery official, probably trying to decide whether to order him to abandon his post. But Marcus knew that order would never come. The tomb guards had a sacred trust, and that trust didn't come with weather exceptions. In over 90 years of continuous guard duty, the post had never been abandoned. Not during the blizzard of 1978, when snow drifts reached the top of the tomb. Not during Hurricane Isabel in 2003, when winds reached 90 miles per hour. And not tonight, no matter how fierce this storm became. The rain was now falling so hard that it was difficult to distinguish individual drops. It was like standing under a waterfall, a constant deluge that made breathing a conscious effort. Marcus's uniform was so saturated that water was literally running out of his sleeves and pants legs with every movement. His shoes, despite their perfect polish that morning, were now completely submerged in the standing water that covered the plaza. But his pace never varied. 21 steps. Turn. 21 seconds. Turn. The rhythm was as steady as a heartbeat, as reliable as the sunrise. This was what the unknown soldiers deserved, a guard who would never waver, never compromise, never abandon his sacred duty. As the storm raged on, something remarkable began to happen. Despite the emergency warnings, despite the obvious danger, more people continued to arrive at Arlington. Word was spreading through social media, through phone calls, through the mysterious network that connects those who understand the meaning of true dedication. They came in small groups, taking shelter wherever they could find it, all drawn by the same compelling sight. A young Marine corporal, still in his dress blues from an evening ceremony at the Pentagon, stood with water streaming down his face as he watched Marcus's unwavering routine. Next to him, an elderly World War II veteran leaned heavily on his walker, his grandson supporting him against the wind. A Navy chaplain had arrived with several sailors, all of them silent witnesses to something that transcended ordinary military duty. General Hawkins found herself thinking about her own son, a lieutenant serving in Afghanistan. She wondered if he would have the strength, the dedication, the sheer force of will to continue this duty under these conditions. The thought filled her with both pride and humility, pride in the military that could produce soldiers like Marcus Rodriguez, and humility at witnessing a level of commitment that few could match. 21 steps south, turn, 21 seconds of silence. During those 21 seconds, as Marcus stood facing the tomb, a piece of metal siding from a nearby building sailed through the air like a giant razor blade, embedding itself in the ground just 15 feet away. The sound it made cutting through the wind was audible even over the storm's roar. Several people in the watching crowd gasped, but Marcus remained perfectly still, his rifle at present arms, his eyes fixed on the inscription that honored the unknown dead. Colonel Mitchell had seen enough. Despite General Hawkins's earlier words, he felt compelled to act. He stepped out from under the amphitheater overhang, immediately feeling the full force of the storm as he made his way toward the plaza. The wind nearly knocked him down twice, and by the time he reached the edge of Marcus's walking route, he was as soaked as the young sergeant. "Soldier!" he shouted over the wind, timing his words for when Marcus would be closest to him. Marcus heard the call but didn't acknowledge it. His training was clear. While on duty at the tomb, he was not to break character for any reason short of a direct threat to the monument or the safety of visitors. A storm, no matter how severe, didn't qualify. Colonel Mitchell tried again. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I'm ordering you to take shelter." This time Marcus's eyes flicked briefly toward the colonel, just long enough to register the rank insignia and the serious expression on the officer's face, but he continued his walk without breaking stride. The colonel wasn't in his chain of command, and more importantly, the duty he had sworn to uphold superseded any order that would compromise the honor guard of the unknown soldiers. 21 steps north, turn. 21 seconds of silence. Frustrated but also deeply impressed, Colonel Mitchell retreated to the shelter of the amphitheater. General Hawkins met him with a knowing look. "He's not going to leave, is he?" the colonel said, wringing water from his beret. "Would you?" General Hawkins replied. "If you truly understood what this place means, what those soldiers represent, would you abandon your post for a little wind and rain?" The colonel looked back at Marcus, now completing another perfect circuit. Despite conditions that were becoming increasingly dangerous, a new respect dawned in his eyes. This wasn't just military discipline, this was something approaching the sacred. As if summoned by the extraordinary nature of the moment, more military personnel continued to arrive. A group of Air Force officers from nearby Bolling Air Force Base, several Marines from the Marine Barracks in Washington, even a delegation of foreign military attachés, who had been attending a dinner at the Pentagon when word of the storm and the steadfast guard reached them. They came not as tourists or casual observers, but as fellow warriors who recognized something extraordinary when they saw it. In an age when military service was often taken for granted, when the sacrifices of the armed forces were sometimes forgotten by a civilian population focused on other concerns, Marcus Rodriguez was providing a reminder of what true dedication looked like. 21 steps south, turn, 21 seconds of silence. The storm was beginning to show signs of weakening, but it was still far from over. Wind speeds had dropped to a mere 80 miles per hour, and the rain, while still torrential, was no longer falling at quite the same impossible angle. But Marcus showed no signs of relief or relaxation. His duty would continue regardless of the weather, just as it had every day for over 90 years. Among the watching crowd, conversations were taking place in hushed tones, barely audible over the continuing storm. Veterans were sharing stories of their own service, of moments when duty had demanded everything they had to give. Active duty personnel were reflecting on their own commitment, wondering if they would have the strength to match what they were witnessing. The elderly World War II veteran, still supported by his grandson, spoke in a voice cracked with emotion. "I fought at Normandy, saw boys die for their country without hesitation, but this is something else. This is pure devotion." As the storm finally began to subside, something unprecedented happened. General Hawkins stepped forward from the crowd, her decision made. She walked onto the plaza, her own uniform soaked and disheveled, and positioned herself at attention facing the tomb. One by one, the other military personnel followed her lead. Colonel Mitchell joined her, then the Marine Corporal, the Navy chaplain, the Air Force officers. The elderly World War II veteran, despite his grandson's protests, shuffled forward on his walker and stood as straight as his aged body would allow. Within minutes, nearly 50 military personnel from all branches of service had formed an impromptu honor formation on the plaza. 21 steps north. Turn. 21 seconds of silence. As Marcus completed his turn and began his next circuit, he saw them. For the first time in 18 months of guard duty, his composure nearly broke. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the sight of dozens of his fellow service members standing in the rain, honoring not just the unknown soldiers, but the dedication he had shown in protecting their memory. General Hawkins stepped forward as Marcus approached. "Sergeant Rodriguez," she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the diminishing wind. "By order of the Secretary of Defense, you are hereby commended for extraordinary devotion to duty under extreme conditions. Your actions tonight have honored not only the unknown soldiers, but every person who has ever worn the uniform of the United States military." Marcus completed his 21 steps, executed his turn, and for the first time that night, broke protocol. He came to attention facing the general and rendered a perfect salute, water still streaming from his uniform, his eyes bright with emotion he could no longer contain. The applause that followed was unlike anything Arlington had ever heard. Not the polite clapping of tourists, but the thunderous appreciation of warriors recognizing one of their own. As the storm clouds finally began to part, revealing the first stars of the night, Marcus Rodriguez knew that this moment would define not just his military career, but his entire life. The unknown soldiers had their guardian, and tonight, the world had witnessed what true honor looked like.